Hello, welcome to Strictly Money at the Newsroom, where all voices matter. I'm Saijal Patel. We are in the midst of the greatest transfer of wealth in modern history, and yet a majority of families are not prepared for the transition of wealth, power, or even values. Well, this is where a family charter can make a difference. It's a document that essentially codifies a family's mission statement. To discuss how it works and how you can create one is Richa Arora. She's Senior Family Advisor with KPMG's Family Office. Richa, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, Saijal. It's good to be back.
So some call it a family charter, some call it a constitution, or even a family shared purpose. But this is something that's expressed in writing, right? So explain why it's important.
Yeah. So I like to say a family charter is like a bridge to a family's future. It lays down the key approaches, principles on how to communicate, make decisions, resolve conflicts, and navigate transition. And very important, especially as families look to discuss sensitive issues, and it creates better accountability and really helps to unpack individual voices between the different family members.
Okay. So explain to me then, Richa, who it's for. Does everyone need one, or does certain circumstances warrant it more than others?
Yeah. So family charters are typically created by families that have significant wealth or are looking to navigate a transition ahead. For example, next generation coming into the family business, or there's a big liquidity event, or they just don't know how to make decisions in terms of transition of ownership. However, I would say a family charter can be a very effective tool for any family because it is centered around the family itself and overall just improves the family's harmony.
Okay. So what are some of the questions then that they need to think about? Like what's a good starting point?
A good starting point for a family is to have a baseline, whether they're doing this themselves or with an independent advisor. Create a baseline of who your family is, what are your inherent family dynamics, the different personalities, what are you looking to achieve, why do you want to have a family charter to begin with, what is the purpose of your wealth, and once a family has really flushed all of that out, a good starting point is creating your family's vision, mission, understanding the family values, and then going from there. Collective aspirations should be a part of it, and whether you're taking the process with one key objective in mind. For example, for some families, they have not made high stakes decisions together, and this may be a first time they're going about it. Make sure that a decision making framework is a key component of your family charter, so it should be really needs dependent, but with the family dynamics in mind, and making sure that you're engaging every member of the family in the process.
Richa, it's you hit on something that's, I think, really important that I find is missed is the values piece, right? Because when you have different values, I find that tends to be the source of conflict. So it's really important to get that, I guess, a discussion around that. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So for families that take this process upon themselves, if there's high emotions involved, it does help to slow down the process. If it's a family leader, sit down with each family member and make sure that you understand where they're coming from, versus if you're doing it with an advisor. Leading practice does say that having a third party or a neutral facilitator learning about individual values as a starting point is really help. And then families tend to codify their collective family values because that becomes their shared purpose. But without alignment of values across the family, the process just becomes very hard. And I find in my experience that there is a greater lack of buy-in. And those are the charters or documents that sit on shelves.
Yeah, and the important part is sometimes having that third party neutral person who has seen situations like this and has been able to navigate that so well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, very sensitive conversations, and someone that is trained to ask the tough questions
Hmm.
and mediate
Right.
conflict.
Welcome back. Richa, I want to talk about some of the challenges that a family charter can help resolve. And one that often comes up is this concept around fair versus equal. This tends to create a lot of bad blood, rather, if it's not handled well. Talk about this.
Yeah, great question, Saijal. I think the fair versus equal concept in itself is so confused. Families think, for ones that have an operating business, as an example, they're not quite sure as to how to have that conversation, and if there are certain family members that are working in the business versus not, what is fair. The ones that are in the business have put in their sweat equity, and oftentimes a tool like a family charter and the process that the family takes to build one can really flush out the key sort of principles around what do you think is fair, and what do you want the next generation, what are the criterias for entering and exiting the business, how do you distribute assets. And I found from my experience, it's been a very meaningful exercise for families, and one often that can prevent future conflicts. One example, I talked earlier about a family that I worked with where they had not made some of these decisions, and now they're looking to transition the business in the next 3 to 4 years. And there's multiple family members involved, but there's also cousins involved. Some are in the business and some are not actively working in the business. And so through this process, we opened the conversation around what do you think is fair? Uh,
Hmm.
should your wealth and distribution of assets in your estate plan, should they be equalized? And what is equal? And who is family for the purposes of
That's a good
equalization
point.
of your assets?
Yeah. Speaking of people getting involved, let's clarify this. A family charter is not one if it's only created by mom and dad, right? But a lot of people
Correct.
do that.
Correct. I would say a favorite quote comes to mind. If a family were a boat, it would be a canoe that makes no progress unless everyone paddles. It's one of my favorite quotes,
Makes
and
sense.
I tend to use this quite a lot in my work with families. And I say, look, the best family charters are the ones that are co-created by individual family members. It creates greater collaboration, greater buy-in, greater consensus, and it lends greater weight to the rules and the principles that you're about to create.
Risha, let me ask you this. How do you get family on board then when most people have a very difficult time talking about money? That's probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is there's still a lot of stigma around it.
Absolutely. So I find having just open one-on-one conversations with each family members to try and just educate them around, why is a process like this even meaningful? How does it connect the dots to you as a family member becoming a good steward of wealth? It's oftentimes a softer land with families, and a lot of education, Sejal, up front, and also talking about other families and what's worked well, what's not worked well, is oftentimes a good way to lay the foundation. So my typical approach is, I meet with families one-on-one and understand where they're coming from. Why do they even want to create a family charter? What is it going to be used for? What are some decisions they would be making in the future? And through that sort of open, safe conversation, I find I am able to build trust and buy-in into
Mhm.
creating a tool like this.
Okay. We only have 40 seconds left to the end of this interview, Richa. How does one get one done then? And do they have to work with a professional, or are there resources or ways that they can do it themselves if they want to? And their
Yeah, so
situation isn't as complicated, say.
Yeah, so I would say if the situation is not complicated, a family can just, start with a family meeting themselves and understand the pros and cons. Why do they want to create it? Start with creating your family values, vision, and mission, and just start to work through step by step. Not an overnight exercise, but if they want to work with a facilitator, then just bring someone in to help guide you along the process to have the tough conversations,
Okay.
and give it the time.
Yeah. We really appreciate your time today, Richa. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Sejal, for having me. It's a pleasure.
Richa Arora from KPMG's Family Office.